If you want a simple and solid defense against the move pawn to e4, then the Scandinavian defense is an excellent option for you. It comes after we play the move pawn to d5. Now, first of all, if we ask ourselves, what exactly does this move accomplish? Well, we attack white's e4 pawn with our d5 pawn. So here in this position, we're essentially forcing white to make a move because their pawn is being attacked. So white has to react. They can either take our d pawn, they can push, or they can defend with a piece. If they take, that's their most common move. First, if they decide to push up, we can now play the move pawn to c5, and this will pretty much transpose into an improved French because we don't have a bad light squared bishop, and we also just take good center control on the board, and this makes a d4 push pretty annoying for white. If they get their knight out, we can get our knight out on return. If they pin, we can just pin right back, eliminating a defender of this critical e5 pawn. If they take, we can just take back. We can use this open file for our benefit. And we do have doubled pawns, but this pawn can be helpful for, I guess, center attacks and stuff. So it's not a big deal if they take. Instead, if they castle, we can just play the move pawn to e6, and we can now look to reroute this g knight to e7, and then f5 or g6, with the main idea of just, again, applying more pressure to these squares. And then once we do so, we can get our bishop out to like e7. If they try to push, we can always just drop back. And then, yeah, once we reroute our knight, we can get our bishop out to e7, we can castle, and this is a very nice position for us. We are doing pretty well here. Okay, if white decides to defend with like the knight, this is an uncommon and therefore pretty bad option because this just invites us to push. And here, by far the most popular move for white is the move knight to e2. And just take a minute and look at this position. This is just so sad and terrible because we can now just get an e5 push in, and this knight is just not really doing anything here, and it's also blocking in their bishop and queen from being in the game. So if they decide to defend, just know that's not a good option for them. So that brings us to white's last option and their best option, which is to take on d5. Here we'll recapture with the queen, and white will most likely play knight to c3, hitting our queen. So here, instead of playing like a move like queen e5 check or queen to d8, undeveloping our queen entirely, I like to play the move queen to a5. This keeps her queen in the game and active instead of just undeveloping it. So after a move like d4, we can now play the very important pawn to c6. And this move is pretty darn important for 3 good reasons. First of all, it prevents the knight from ever like coming in, so that's one less thing to worry about. It also makes the d5 push much more difficult, and it creates this nice c7 backup square for her queen to run to if her queen ever gets attacked while it's kind of out in the open right here. So after white like develops, we can just develop in return, like bishop to c4. We can now play bishop to g4 pinning. After like a move like castles, we can go pawn to e6, opening up our dark squared bishop and clamping down on this d5 pawn even more. If they ever play a move like d2, just know that this is kind of your cue to run back to c7 with your queen, because I mean, you can stay here if you want. You can also go to b6, but I mean, this x-ray can make stuff pretty difficult, and you can accidentally totally blunder a piece with all those discovered attacks you're giving white. So, like I said, here I like to play queen to c7. I have a good amount of success with all these lines. So, you know, if they ever try and play a move like h3, we just drop back, keep the pin, doing great. Rook to e1, we can now get our bishop out to d6. And this is a pretty dangerous combo, because if we go back to this position, if they play like rook here now, and we can go here, and right now, currently, we're threatening to win this pawn. So if they play like some random move like a3, we can now take on f3, take the knight, and this wins us a pawn because the queen has to take back, and now we can just snatch up this pawn because the defender is now removed, a classic tactic of removing the defender, and the king is forced to move somewhere, and now we can just drop our bishop back. For some reason, the engine thinks this is an equal game, but, I mean, we're just up a pawn here, so we're doing pretty well. But if we go back here and they instead decide not to fall for that and play a move like h3, we can now just drop back, keep the pin. Again, rook e1, get our bishop out to d6. If they play, I don't know, a move like a3, we can now get our knight out to d7, or we can decide to castle. But I like to get our knight out to d7, and then, sure, we are making a lot of moves without castling. This is like the 12th move and we haven't castled, but because our position is so darn solid, we can afford to take a little bit of extra time to not castle. So if we reach this position, we have two options, which is to either castle kingside or queenside. Kingside is probably the safer option, you know. Just, I mean, you can never go wrong with castling queenside. But here, I personally like castling queenside more. It is the worst option, but I just like it because it can lead to some very aggressive games, having opposite side castling. And I just like this option too because, you know, like I said, just it's aggressive. We can look to like push some pawns and stuff go for a pawn storm on the king side. We can look to get our knight into d5, go for a trade. Our knight can also come to b6 here. And you know, I just highly recommend castling queenside here, but then again, kingside is also just as good. So that right there is pretty much the setup we're looking at. But if we go back here, there is a pretty common trap that white can fall into. So if white decides to play the move like bishop to g5, we can now play bishop f4. And if they play a move like e2 or really anything else aside from taking, we can now take the knight on f3. And we're going to win the bishop here because, as you see here, our queen now sees this undefended bishop. This is a big-time benefit of our queen placing our queen on a5 because it stays active and views this whole file on the board. So if they decide to take the knight, that doesn't work because now we can take the bishop and hit the queen. The queen has to take back, and now we can just take with the pawn, and we're just up a full bishop here. So that can happen in various ways, but that is like a nice trap to know if they ever go for this g5 sort of pin-like thing, and just play g4, and then you can end up winning a bishop if white does not know what they're. Alright, lastly, going back to this position, there is a few gambits that I want to run through so we know what to do against them. If they play the move knight to f3, this is known as the Tennison Gambit. It's very tricky to deal with, but we'll just take on e4, knight to g5, hitting our pawn back, and instead of playing into white's hands and, you know, going into all the tricks, we'll just let white win their pawn right back. They'll take back. We can now play pawn to f5, hitting the knight, taking full center control. The knight's going to have to fall back. We can get our knight to f6, and now we just have a full-on center control over white. We have very easy development, and to counter the Tennison Gambit, that's pretty much what you want to play. We're up 0.9, almost a full pawn on the eval bar. So the Tennison Gambit, not too hard to counter as long as we don't defend this pawn. If we defend the pawn, that can allow white to, you know, do all their tricks and traps. Now going back here, this gambit is when they take the pawn, and this is an extremely tricky gambit. It's after pawn to b4. This is the Leonhardt gambit, and at first glance, this looks pretty dang bad for white because, you know, this pawn looks so free, but there is actually so many tricks and traps here. Like, white can play, like, knight to b5. They can also get their rook in this way, and trust me, this is extremely unpleasant to deal with. So We will instead just drop our queen back to b6, not fall into any of white's traps. Again, taking is the best, but trust me, some of those taking lines, and that can get real nasty for black. There's a good amount of traps there, and white can just get really aggressive. So we'll just drop our queen back and, just carry on with our normal Scandinavian defense development. And it's going to be a pretty much normal game here, except white will be playing with a pretty extended b4 pawn. I thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you have some fun playing the Scandinavian defense. It's been one of my favorite openings for a bit, and I will see you all next time, and have a great day.